Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Echo Live. My name is Anna, and I'm coming to you from the Michigan Science Center's Echo Distance Learning Program. Today, we have a very cool episode planned for you. We are going to talk all about the science of sanitizer. We actually have a very special guest who will be joining us just a little bit later on in our program. But as always, if you have not done so already, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat or the comments feature of whichever program you are joining in from. I can see that we have friends starting to introduce themselves on Facebook. So we've got some friends joining us from across the state of Michigan, a couple friends from Marine City, our friends from Dearborn. I see that we have a friend, Diego, who's joining us all the way from Argentina. So welcome, everybody. Remember that the chat or the comments feature of whichever of our live programs platforms that you are joining in through is your way to ask and answer questions throughout the program. We'll keep an eye on all of your comments, so make sure that you are answering all of our very important questions that we'll be asking you today. But you can also ask questions of me and of our expert who we'll meet just a little bit later on. Now, we've mentioned a little bit about hand hygiene here on Echo Live in the past. We've talked about the importance of hand washing and exactly how soap is an effective germ killer against things like viruses and bacteria. We talked about how this is part of cell structure, that hand washing is important because of the structure of soap. So as we talk about hand sanitizer today, it's important to remember, right, that hand sanitizer is not an alternative to washing your hands. You can't substitute it, but sometimes when we're out in public, hand washing isn't available to us. We can't carry running water and soap with us all the time, but hand sanitizer can be a good temporary solution while we're out and about until we return home or to somewhere else where soap and water is available to us to wash our hands to make sure that we're all staying happy and healthy. So let's talk a little bit about how that process worked. Quick reminder, this is a diagram of a soap molecule. So if we could see a soap molecule way up close, we would see that it has a hydrophilic head, which is the green part here. Hydrophilic means that it loves water. It wants to be near water, but it has a hydrophobic tail. Remember that phobia means you're afraid of something. And so we say that the hydrophobic tail is afraid of water. It does not want to be near the water at all. The reason soap is so great for cleaning our hands, right, is that structure of the soap molecule allows it to penetrate those greasy or oily substances which might be on our hands. It traps them in these globs, which we call micelles, and then carries all that stuff down the sink when we wash our hands underneath running water. Does anyone remember, based on what you've heard on Echo Live or maybe heard on TV or throughout your life, how long do we need to wash our hands for in order for it to be considered effective? Does anyone know just how long you need to wash your hands for? There's a specific amount of time that's very, very important that we follow. So this is a great time to practice using the chat feature. If you know what the amount of time we need to wash our hands for, type it in the chat. See a couple friends starting to tell us 20 seconds is the minimum amount of time that we need to wash our hands with soap and water to make sure we're getting all of that grease and grime and also destroying some of those viruses and bacteria that could be living on our hands. Now, 20 seconds is the minimum. So if you said 30 seconds, that's even better. And I see a couple people suggesting how long, ways that you could remember how long to wash your hands for. Jason in Zoom and Steve, everyone's telling me about 20 to 30 seconds, which is about the amount of time it takes you to sing the ABCs. Happy birthday is another one, but those are pretty common suggestions. So what I wanted to pose to you today are some alternatives for hand washing songs. So up here are some of my favorite 20-second hand washing songs that you can sing if you're kind of sick of the ABCs by now, which I know that I am. So if you know the song Truth Hurts by Lizzo, if you sing the chorus to that song, that's about 20 seconds. If you are a classic rocker, Living on a Prayer by the band Bon Jovi is another great 20-second hand washing song. If you are a musical person, the chorus to My Shot from Hamilton works too. And then, of course, one of my personal favorites, the amount of time it takes you to sing about 2 characters in Baby Shark will also get you to that 20-second minimum amount of time that you need to wash your hands in order to completely destroy anything that might be on the surface. Now, hand sanitizer works very, very similarly. If we take a look up here in this very top part of our diagram, these are some diagrams of the structure of alcohol. So alcohol is the main ingredient in hand sanitizers that are effective against viruses and bacteria. Non-alcohol based sanitizers are not effective against viruses and bacteria because they don't have the same cell structure. We can see that these also have a hydrophilic head and a hydrophobic tail. So those are able to do the same thing that we saw with our emulsifier, our soap molecules, and they can actually penetrate these membranes of viruses and bacteria, which causes them to break open. It kills the cell, and then it washes away all those pieces down the sink so that they can't be picked up by someone else. So sanitizers are a great temporary solution to keeping your hands clean, but it can also be very difficult to find hand sanitizer in stores right now, which is why we are going to teach you how to make your own using just a few ingredients a little bit later on in our program. But first, we have an expert here from Axalta, because Axalta is helping everyone right now by manufacturing hand sanitizer in some of their facilities. And one of them is actually right down the road. So we are going to be joined here by Matt Boland from Axalta, who's going to talk to us about how hand sanitizer is produced on the industrial scale before we get to making it on the homemade scale. So Matt, come on into our Zoom meeting here. Everyone, if you have questions for Matt throughout the program, you can type them in the chat and he'll save some time to answer those for you as we move through our program.
Well, hello, Anna. Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for having me here. My name is Matt Boland, as Anna said, and I'm responsible for transportation technology here at Axalta. And I'm coming to you live from our factory here in Mount Clemens. You can see the factory floor behind me. And I'm super excited to spend some time talking about what the great people at Axalta are doing with Sanitizer. One of the reasons I'm excited about this discussion is that I'm a huge fan of the Michigan Science Center. One of the main reasons that I love it so much is that I've been studying chemistry and math for 30 years or more, and it's part of what I do and what I love. Another reason that I love talking to you guys is that, here we go. The Science Center is a big part of my family as well. Here's some pictures of my 13-year-old or soon to be 13-year-old daughter, Mia. She's very embarrassed about these pictures, but I'm very happy to share them because we have a lot of great memories from the Science Center, and we're looking forward to July 1st, hopefully, fingers crossed, when the Science Center opens back up. Anyway, I wanted to spend a little time talking to you about Sanitizer, but before that, I wanted to take a couple seconds to talk a little bit about what we do at Axalta Coating Systems. So Axalta is a global paint company with over 14,000 employees working in 130 different countries. So that means anywhere at any time there's someone in the world designing or developing a new color or a new paint for many cool applications. Some of those applications include painting cars, trucks, buses, farm equipment, motorcycles, furniture, buildings, houses, and even amusement park rides. So it's a very exciting place to work. Another reason that I'm pretty proud of Axalta is that, as I talked about, I'm coming to you live from our site here in Mount Clemens, which is just north of the Science Center. And this facility is both a laboratory and a factory, and it's been operating for over 50 years. We have 400 people or more working here every day, and there's all kinds of jobs that young scientists can aspire to do to come and work in our factory or labs. Now, normally during this time period, the teams in our laboratories, our scientists and chemists and technicians are developing new colors or new paint products for our customers. Or the folks in the plant behind me are usually developing large batches of paint to be supplied to our customers, many of whom are customers in Michigan and around Michigan, painting cars, trucks, and trucks. Now, unfortunately, during the last couple of months, we've had this challenge with the coronavirus. So the people at Exalta, in particular the site here at Mount Clemens, have shifted their focus from developing and producing paint to instead helping out and finding ways where we can help our community during this time. One such way that we've been able to do that is by providing PPE, or for personal protective equipment, which I'm going to talk a little bit about later, all around the globe. Some of that equipment has included face masks, gloves, and coveralls. Another exciting area where the team at Exalta has found ways to help is by taking the expertise in chemistry and paint manufacturing and turning it into the manufacture of hand sanitizer. Now, as Anna pointed out, hand sanitizer is very important. Now, it's not meant to take the place of soap and water to kill or stop the transmission of viruses or bacteria, but it's very important for the real heroes on our industry, like doctors and nurses and people that work at fire stations and police stations, who sometimes can't take the time or don't have access to soap and water, so they can clean their hands during their work. And again, our team's very excited to being able to help out in this area. So I'd like to take a few minutes and talk about what we've done to move over our paint manufacturing to produce sanitizer. But before I do that, I want to take a quick pause and talk to you a little bit about safety. So, safety checkpoint here is really about personal protective equipment. And so what I'd like to do is pause and ask you a quick question about what type of personal protective equipment do you think might become in use when you're working either in a plant or a lab making paint or hand sanitizer? Now, I'll give you a hint. Anna and I are wearing some of that equipment right now. Looking for the chat if any answers come in. Anna, you got any? So Anna, I couldn't quite hear all the answers that came in from your phone, but I did want to point out, absolutely, we have lots of different personal protective equipment that we use here in our site and in our labs. Those include goggles, face shields, respirators, and earplugs and earmuffs. We also use coveralls or lab coats to protect our body, and a whole bunch of different types of gloves depending on the application. And finally, we use safety shoes. Some of our safety shoes are actually steel-toed shoes to protect our toes from heavy metal objects. Now that we've spent some time talking about safety, I'd like to get into the exciting part of what we've done here with sanitizer. Now, the interesting thing about the sanitizer that we're producing here at Exalta is that it's made from only 4 ingredients: isopropyl alcohol, glycerol, hydrogen peroxide, and water. And what's interesting about the formula or recipe that we're following is that it's approved by the World Health Organization and the FDA to be used in industrial applications to help out many of our first responders. Now, as Anna pointed out, alcohol is the active ingredient in any of the sanitizer solutions that we're going to talk about, whether it's the material we're making here or the recipe or formula that Anna will talk about later. Alcohol, as we talked about, is important because it's the ingredient that actually breaks down the membranes of the virus or kills a bacteria. You can use different types of alcohols, but in our case, we chose isopropyl alcohol because this material is also very common in the making of paint. Now, a big challenge for our scientists was to make sure that the alcohol that we're using met all the purity requirements of the formula for industrial use. And we use fancy equipment such as a gas chromatograph to make sure that the isopropyl alcohol was super pure for our application. The second ingredient in our formula is glycerol. Now we're going to talk about a different material that we can use in place of glycerol later for your home formula or recipe. But in this case, glycerol is used as a moisturizer. And the reason it's used as a moisturizer is that the glycerol molecules pictured here in the picture frame on the screen actually love water, and they keep and hold the water. So while the alcohol is in there doing its thing, taking care of the virus and bacteria, it'll evaporate out and have a tendency to leave your hands dry. But the glycerol holds the water close to our skin and keeps it nice and moist. The third ingredient used in our formulation is hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide is a common material that you can find in pharmacies and even in farm stores. It's used on farms to help clean out containers and other things that livestock might eat from. So in a similar way, we use hydrogen peroxide in our formula to sterilize the containers that will ultimately fill out our sanitizer in, and also to kill any bacteria that might come in from some of the other ingredients. Now, the last ingredient in our recipe or formula is purified water. Now, the water is really important because it's what allows us to spread that sanitizer all over our skin and get all the nooks and crannies on our hand. Now, the water that we use is super pure water. Now, we take the great water that comes in from Michigan, our city water. We go through a two-step process to make sure that it's super pure and good for use in our sanitizer. The first step, fancy word here, is reverse osmosis. This step actually is a very, very fine filtration to take out any impurities or particles or metal ions that might come in from the city water that's still good to drink. Then the water comes into our storage tank. And the materials waits in the storage tank until we need to use it in one of our recipes, whether it's for paint or in this case, hand sanitizer. Before we use that water in our batch of sanitizer, we expose it to an ultraviolet light, which will then kill off any extra bacteria that may have formed while it was in the storage tank. Now that we have all the ingredients for our recipe, it's time to actually prepare a batch of sanitizer. And again, what makes it special about what we can do here at a factory like the one behind me is that we have lots of large equipment, so we can produce big batches of material for use and for, in our case, donation to many of the hospitals and police stations around our community here in Michigan. So the process that we follow to take that recipe and put it into a large batch is we use a mixed tank, very similar to the ones out here and also pictured here on the screen in green. Two ingredients, the alcohol, the isopropyl alcohol, and the water, as I said, are already commonly used in many of the paints that we make. So they're pumped into this tank through different pipes, like the yellow one shown here. The other ingredients, hydrogen peroxide and glycerol, they're not so commonly used in the making of the paint that we use here at Mount Clemens. So we had to bring those in special. And then we pump them in from 55-gallon drums into that mixed tank. And when all four ingredients on there, we'll mix them around together to get a nice homogeneous mixture. Once we've got the material all mixed in the tank, our chemists will take samples of that material to make sure that it meets all the purity requirements required in our recipe or formula. Then it's time to fill. We'll fill the sanitizer into 1-gallon plastic jugs. Now, each gallon jug will sit for 3 days before we ship it to any of our first responders or friends in the community, because we want the active ingredients, particularly the peroxide and the alcohol, to clean out any or kill any of the bacteria that may have come in with those plastic jugs. And the final step in our process is to put a label on those jugs. And labels are very important in the chemical and paint industry, just like in the sanitizer industry. Why they're so important is because these jugs are commonly used jugs in lots of different applications. We want to make sure that whoever's using our sanitizer knows exactly what's in it and exactly what it's used for. Once we have the jugs labeled and they're all closed up and ready to go, the most exciting part that our team gets to participate in is donating that material to the communities. And so far, we've donated thousands of gallons of sanitizer all around the globe, and we're very, very excited about this effort. And here's a picture of my good friend Paul from the Science Center. And this is the very first batch of sanitizer we made at Mount Clemens, we delivered 4 gallons to Paul so he could set them up at the Science Center. So when we return to regular operation at the Science Center, we're going to clean our hands in the way that Anna described earlier. Now with that, I'm going to stay online and looking forward to some of the great questions that might come up. And I love spending time with you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Matt. I think I'm double trying to, but if anyone has questions for Matt about how Axalta is manufacturing hand sanitizer, which is a bit different than the process we're going to follow, type those in the chat. Matt is still around. He's still here to answer your questions that you might have about Axalta or the manufacturing process, whether it's maybe about some of the things that they paint normally or their process that they've shifted over to now. But this is the part of the program where we are actually going to be creating our own hand sanitizer solution. An important thing to note, right, is that homemade hand sanitizer should really only be made if you're not able to find these manufactured products in store. Obviously, the things that go through a manufacturing process, like at Axalta, are strictly quality control. They make sure that everything is completely pure and that there's no contamination of any of their products. But it is also difficult to find certain things in store right now, finding hand sanitizers, finding cleaning products. So if you have access to these 3 ingredients, just isopropyl alcohol, that's at least 91% strength, aloe vera gel, which is going to act as your moisturizer. So instead of glycerol, an alternative is this aloe vera gel, which you can buy at most grocery stores or pharmacies. And then we use about 3 to 5 drops of lemon juice or any essential oil, which just helps it to smell a little bit nicer than it might without those products. So we've got 2 recipes here. We have a 60% strength alcohol recipe, which is the minimum amount of alcohol content of your hand sanitizer in order for it to be considered effective. And then we also have a 68% alcohol recipe that you can follow as well. So we'll be going with the 68% alcohol recipe here in the studio today. If you do have these materials out, you can follow along as we make it, or you can always rewatch this video since we post all of our Echo Live videos to our Facebook and YouTube channel once we're done filming them live. So we'll go with the 68% strength hand sanitizer here. So I've got all my materials here in the studio, but what's really important is before the program, I made sure to wash my hands and to wash all of my materials. That can be your way of ensuring that you have no contamination of any of your materials and that there's not any sort of bacteria on your hands that you might be getting inside your hand sanitizer. So we'll zoom in on the table here, and I've got some of our supplies down here on this tray, some of them off to the side. So to make this, you'll just need a couple measuring cups, those ingredients we mentioned, and then something to mix in. I also have some empty containers here. This one is unfortunately the same color as my green screen. So if I turn off my green screen, you might be able to see that one a little bit better. But I also washed all of my empty containers that I'll use for storing my hand sanitizer. So I have a couple empty miniature hand sanitizer containers that have been emptied out. I have an empty container here that I actually bought from the store empty, but I still made sure to wash that one. And then I washed all my other materials as well. So for that 68% alcohol recipe, the first thing we'll add in is 3/4 cup of our isopropyl alcohol. So it needs to be at least 3/4 cups of alcohol to 1/4 cup of our aloe vera gel. So I made sure to measure it here inside my measuring cup. And we'll just pour it here inside my beaker now. Of course, here on Echo Live, we use things like beakers, right? But any sort of mixing bowl or jar, as long as it's clean, will work just as well. Next is our aloe vera gel, which we said this is here as a moisturizer because the alcohol on its own is what's good at killing the viruses and bacteria. But the aloe vera gel is what's going to help it to not dry out your hands so much. So we'll just set that off to the side. And then we just need 1/4 cup of this aloe vera gel. Really making sure we're tapping it flat so that we get an accurate measurement here. And we are at exactly 1/4 cup of that aloe vera gel. So we're just going to add that down inside our mixture carefully so nothing splashes out of our jar or container here. I also have the spatula here for this purpose that I can use to kind of scrape the inside of my jar, make sure we get all of that aloe vera gel down inside. There we go. And then the last thing we add to this homemade recipe is our lemon juice. So set that over there, and I just have some of our lemon juice. And we said this is really just here for the smell. So if you don't have lemon juice or an essential oil, this is not a necessary ingredient, but it does help it to smell kind of nice. And we'll just add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 drops there. and then set that off to the side. Now it's important that you mix this together completely. We really want to get all of our aloe vera. So if you have some on the side of your glass like I did, we're really going to mix it around. The aloe vera is what gives it this kind of bright green color. You're just going to really, really stir it with a whisk or a spoon. So make sure your container is large enough that you have some space in order to really mix everything together. You'll want to stir it for at least a minute just to really make sure you get all of those molecules really, really mixed in. Like we said, the moisturizer only works because it grabs onto the water from the isopropyl mixture, holds it in suspension or in solution. It's going to keep everything together. So now that we have that mixed in really, really well, our last step is just putting it into our container so that we can use the hand sanitizer when we're not at home. So I have a few empty containers here. Again, I did wash them before the program, even though these already were empty hand sanitizer containers. And we're just going to carefully pour some through our funnel into our containers. And you'll notice that this stuff is pretty liquidy. We talk about our states of matter here on Echo Live quite a bit. This is pretty liquidy. So if you have a spray bottle that's clean, can also be a great way to carry around your hand sanitizer. So you can use it to spray your hands and rub it in completely, but you can also use it to spray things like your credit cards or your shopping cart, anything like that. Fill our last container here. And then we'll talk just for a moment about how to appropriately use our hand sanitizer, right? So if you've used hand sanitizer, you know that it goes on really, really wet. But your hand sanitizer is not done working while it is still wet on your hands. So if you're going to use hand sanitizer, it's important that you use a good amount, right? Enough that you can completely coat your hands so that any sort of viruses or bacteria that could be on the surface of your hand, so you can get your whole hand wet. And then you need to rub it in until your hands are completely dry. That helps so that the next time you touch a surface, wet hands will more easily pick up germs and dirt and everything like that. But if your hands are completely dry, if you've really rubbed in your hand sanitizer, it will kind of fight that. And so now my hands are completely dry. And of course, you want to always make sure you keep hand sanitizer away from your mouth and away from your eyes because it can burn pretty badly. So that is our homemade sanitizer recipe. If you do have questions about how to make this at home, you can type them in the chat. I do see, let's see if we got any questions, either from Matt or from us. Rachel asked, can you use aloe from a plant? I think that the object of using this aloe vera gel is that it's a gel already, and so it has some of those ingredients like glycerol in them that make it a moisturizer. Whereas aloe on its own from the plant has some different medical properties. I don't know that it would necessarily hold your alcohol in suspension, but good question. So it's important, that's a good place to note that following a recipe when it comes to creating something that's here for your safety is really important. So unless you have an expert who tells you that there's an acceptable alternative to some of these ingredients, it's important to follow the recipe so that you know it's going to be effective, because these recipes were based off of CDC recommendations and the FDA. So Matt, I do have a question for you that came in from Don, unless you had a question first.
No, I just wanted to say that I think you made a great point about following the recipe and the guidelines of the CDC. That's what we spent a lot of time when we were setting up to do. You want to make sure, in particular, you're using the right amount of the active ingredient, the alcohol in particular, so that you're doing it. So it's doing what it's supposed to do in fighting off bacteria and viruses. So very great point, exactly. And I agree.
Great point. So on that point, Don on Facebook asked, how do you make sure that the hand sanitizer you are manufacturing, how do you make sure it meets the requirements when it's done? So do you do additional testing?
Yeah, so we actually do some additional testing. The first thing we'll do is we'll measure the content of the alcohol in particular using a gas chromatograph, as I pointed out earlier. And by using that, it's a long column where we boil the sample of that material. And by knowing where the different materials boil off, we're able to quantify that the amount of ingredients we put into the formula are actually what came out and are guaranteed in that final product. In addition, I think it's important that we spend a lot of time up front validating the quality of each individual ingredient, because the CDC had very strict requirements around the purity level of each of those ingredients.
Great point. Jamie asks, does Axalta just make paint on your normal operation?
That is what we are. We are a company that makes paint, and and sometimes it gets lost, but there is paint in all types of applications around the world. So we produce paint, like I said, for all types of different equipment, different vehicles, sporting equipment, even grills. So yep, that's what our company does, and we're very proud to do that.
Awesome. Jamie asks, do you know why hand sanitizer burns when it gets on your hands sometimes?
I think a little bit of that has to do with the alcohol itself. That actually, well, I think what that sensation, some of that is that it's as it's evaporating out, it's really drying out your skin. And I think that's where the moisturizing component comes into play here, like you're doing in your formula with the aloe vera, we did with the glycerol. And I think that's what's trying to balance that out. But there's going to be a component of that with the alcohol itself.
Thanks. So Jane asks, can they do anything about the recipe if it's really watery?
So there are lots of things you could do to emulsify or thicken the recipe. In our situation, we have a very a limited set of circumstances where we have a special permission to make sanitizer. Again, normally out here on the floor, we're making paint. So we're only allowed to use the 4 ingredients, which all are very liquidy. But you can add other agents to increase the viscosity or thicken it if you're selling this or doing this as a more regular operation.
So we shouldn't recommend that people do that at home, though. I think would be a fair point.
I think that's a really important, great point, Anna. And we, in fact, from our standpoint, we were restricted to any other ingredients besides the 4 that were defined in the recipe. Yeah, you should. I think also for any home application, you should stick to the ingredients laid out for even the home application that Anna described.
I agree, because adding anything to your solution, if you think about the final concentration, right, anything you add to this mixture is decreasing the final amount of alcohol. So even adding something small, right, decreases that percentage, and you cannot drop below 60% alcohol if you want this stuff to be effective at killing the germs that might be on your hands. So that's a great question. Agree. Yeah, yep. So when it comes to making your own, make sure we're following the recipes. We've made sure to do that here because we'd hate for anyone to make something that's not going to be effective at fighting germs. One thing you could substitute out is someone did ask about the lemon juice, right? So we did say 3 to 5 drops of an essential oil, any other one of your choosing, can be substituted out. Not more than 3 to 5 drops. That's the amount that we've decided is a safe amount that you can add without decreasing the concentration below a safe point. But you could substitute maybe peppermint if you enjoy the smell of peppermint, or another essential oil. That will not affect the concentration of your mixture, but you could make it smell differently if that's something that you wanted to try out. All right, and so we do have a couple more questions coming in, but if you have additional questions, Matt and I will continue checking back on the comment section. We'll try to get you answers even after our program wraps today. But we do have a lot of people, Matt, who are just overwhelmingly saying thank you to you and thank you to Axalta for shifting your efforts into helping people during this time, because we all think that's just so awesome.
Oh, thank you very much for those comments. And again, I just want to say, we can't wait till July when you get that Science Center back open, because we're all the people even here in the site here are excited to get down there and check out some of the new exhibits. So thank you very much for the time as well.
You're so welcome. And so with that, everybody, if you do continue to have questions, type them in the chat. We'll keep an eye on those. And if we need to answer some more of those throughout the day, we will. But other than that, we'll say goodbye to everyone. And thank you so much for joining us here for another episode of Echo Live. If you're looking for these hand sanitizer recipes outside of our program, you can visit the Michigan Science Center's website and search for At Home Science. We'll have posted the entire recipe for you with step-by-step instructions so that you can recreate this at home. Thank you again to our sponsors of the Michigan Science Center, like Axalta and like Ford and Denso, who allow us to bring these programs to you every day at 2:30 p.m. We are so excited to see so many people joining in and asking such great questions. So we hope we'll see you back here tomorrow for another exciting episode. And thank you again, Matt, so much for joining us.